So the community at Wolfson is exceptionally diverse. We have people from so many different countries and backgrounds.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan, I'm from Brazil.
Hello, I'm Michaela, I'm from South Africa.
I'm Arjun, I'm from Singapore.
And I'm from the United States.
I am from the Philippines.
I'm originally from Yorkshire.
I'm from Shropshire. I'm from Mexico.
I was born in Washington, D.C., but actually grew up all over the world. I spent 6 years in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa, and 10 years in Tunisia before going back to the U.S.
I'm from Montreal, so I'm French Canadian.
I come from Jerusalem, Israel.
You know, we have so many different people from different countries, different nationalities, different ethnicities.
Yeah. I really don't know a country from which I haven't met someone.
It's like traveling around the world a little bit.
Everybody is also from somewhere else.
Yes.
It's such an international community.
Yeah. But you get so many more interesting conversations with people from wherever, and you also get really good holidays. I'm going to Jordan next month to visit a wolf.
A wolf.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us yet another series of a Wolfson Entrepreneurial event. And today we are actually lucky to have an amazing panel today, which is, I must say, an exceptional one. But you know the drill. Before we get started, I usually like to, in case this is the first time you are joining us, to tell you one or two things about the Wolfson Entrepreneurial Society, why we started it, and how it has been since 2019 when we started. So just like the video you've just watched now, you see that Wolfson College is exceptionally diverse. We have an amazing pool of students, staff members from across the world, across continents, and every year more than 90 countries are always represented at Wolfson College. So you can imagine the resources, you can imagine the talents that actually visit Cambridge at Wolfson College. So we decided to tap into this pool of talent by bringing together this idea of having this entrepreneurial spirit together to see how we can build the next unicorn, how we can help people with their career and all of that. And so today, the Wolfson Entrepreneurial Society has been born out of that passion to see how we can make the world a better place by bringing those team of talents together. And so today we are going to be moving into a very interesting conversation, the place of entrepreneurial skills in consulting industry. So we are bridging consulting industry and what happens in entrepreneurial field. As a founder, as a startup owner, as a student who is kind of interested in consulting, you want to know what entrepreneurial skills you need to actually pursue a career in consulting and all of that. And so today there are two ways. If you're an entrepreneur, then this event is for you. If you're a student, you're not interested in being a founder on the long run, or you've been wondering what are the skill sets that are necessary for consulting? How does entrepreneurship actually come in when it comes to people, management consultants, technical consultants, trying to help businesses solve most of their challenging problems? And so today I have amazing panelists, all the way from BCG, from McKinsey, and from Bain, who has joined us today to see how we can dissect this interesting topic. And so I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves one after the other. And then I think we can then begin to see what it is that they've got for us today. So can we start from Gerard?
Okay. So hi everyone, my name's Gerald Honora. I'm a technology manager here at Bain and Company. I've been at Bain for 2.5 years now, enabling Bain's technical offering in the transformation space. Prior to Bain, I was at BCG, also working within a technical role for the organization design solution. In between both roles, I founded my own bespoke tailoring business called Collarbone London, which I still actively manage. So, you know, it's an ongoing thing for me, whilst in my current role at Bain. I founded Collarbone out of a passion for fine tailoring and a lifelong quest to find, you know, products that would fit my 6'5" frame. And I guess like prior to, you know, my career in strategy consulting, I worked in the healthcare information technology space, sort of leading end-to-end solutions implementation in the NHS and private practices across the UK. Prior to that, I worked in sort of product engineering within the education sector, so providing sort of high performance computing and also, you know, educational, I guess, software for students and so on and so forth. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are happy to have you, and it will be interesting to hear from your experience both at Bain, BCG, and in founding your own startup. So I'm very sure that having you today is going to be it's going to make the topic very, very interesting. I think we can move to Ricky.
Sure. Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ricky Asemwata. I'm an associate partner at McKinsey London office. Prior to joining the firm, I started actually prior to my MBA at London Business School, I started and sold a confectionery company that I ran for about 6 years before selling. We pretty much did two things. One was specialize in wedding confectionery, so cakes, cupcakes, dessert tables, all of that sort of thing. But then we also ran corporate events. So as you all know, British weather isn't always as conducive for weddings. So you sort of have wedding season and the off season. And so in the off seasons, we would normally sort of run corporate events where we would bring sort of cake making and cake decorating to team building corporate teams, which was great. At McKinsey, and I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you guys. I have brought in, you know, a lot of my, I guess, entrepreneurship skill sets, which I'm more than happy to discuss with you all, and just the energy that, you know, comes from, you know, having to run your own business, bringing that into the sort of corporate world, and using that to also support the clients that I work with has been great. I think lastly at McKinsey, what I spend a lot of my time on is really around transformations and turnarounds. So going in and working with companies who need to either go from bad to good or good to great, and just sort of help them figure out how to do so operationally as well as financially, which again, I kind of attribute to what lessons that I learned being an entrepreneur myself. So excited to have a conversation with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ricky, and you're welcome. We are looking forward to hear from you about your amazing experience and your journey so far and how that could kind of inspire our audience today. So last but not the least is Wolfson alumni, actually. Leon. Yeah, I can see you rapping Wolfson with your,
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you so much for inviting me over. It's really a shame we can't have that event in person. I was looking forward a lot to trying Ricky's bakery. It would have probably made my day. But yeah, a little bit about myself maybe. So my name is Leon Pietschmann. I'm a management consultant with the Boston Consulting Group. Right now, I am on educational leave and pursuing a PhD in engineering at the Institute for Manufacturing in Cambridge. So I'm really happy to be part of the Wolf Pack. So happy to call myself a member of Wolfson College. And maybe what else did I do? Prior to my career in consulting, I was a founder and spent several years working on my own company. And we were active in the rental car industry market. So we sold digital solutions for fleet management. And that really taught me a lot about entrepreneurship, how to run your own business, what obstacles there are, ownership, and all of the above. And this is why I hope that today I might be able to share a few experiences or share a few lessons that I learned along the way. And also how my time as a founder benefited my later career as a management consultant, and what skills I still use to this day and what skills came in handy. Maybe if we have time, I can touch a little on how we ran a project for the German government about improving conditions for the German startup ecosystem, in which I could really leverage those skills. So I'm really looking forward to that and to a discussion and to all your questions. But lastly, and maybe most importantly, I'm looking forward to an exciting conversation with my co-panelists.
Awesome. You're welcome. You're welcome, Leon. I think without wasting much time, we can get into the job of the day. First of all, I wanted to ask a couple of questions that will help us introduce the topic itself. I'm going to be making a series of comparisons. I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship, then look at intrapreneurship, and then look at consulting on its own. So in case you're watching and you're wondering what's the difference between entrepreneur and an intrapreneur, when we talk about entrepreneur, we're looking at probably somebody who is trying to build your own business, who have your own idea, you want to drive your own initiative to set a startup or whatever business, whatever it is, create new things on your own. But sometimes you see that when you work within an establishment which is not your own, say you are working for McKinsey, you're working for different other companies, you can still be an entrepreneur, but this time around, because you are using your creativity, your ideas to run an establishment which is not your own, but which you are part of, this skill set that you are bringing in as an entrepreneur becomes a skill set for intrapreneur because it's internal within a firm. So on that basis, I think my first question, I don't know who I'm going to direct this to, but it's going to be, what in your view, do you think is the difference between an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur when it comes to the skill sets that they bring and how they utilize them? I don't know who want to go first. Jared?
Yeah, I can go first, I guess. I mean, in my view, an entrepreneur to me is an entrepreneur who hasn't ventured out into the world to execute on things, that they're passionate about. Essentially, they are the same individuals, except one thrives, I guess, out in the world and, based on their own initiatives, whereas the other is much more, I guess, risk averse and doesn't really want to, branch out and try things out for themselves. But I think ultimately most entrepreneurs can become entrepreneurs. So, it's one and the same people to me. It's just different ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think I like the way you ended that by saying most entrepreneurs can become intrapreneur. I think that would lead perfectly into my next question, which is, where does these two things actually meet in the career journey of an entrepreneur? And Ricky, would you be happy to take that in?
Sure. No, I'm more than happy to have a go. So I fully agree with what Jared said. At its core, they both are leaders who innovate, right? Whether internally or externally. And so where does the two, or where do the two meet in of an entrepreneur? It can differ. I've gone from being an entrepreneur to an intrapreneur. Leon also sort of gave, his, spoke about his journey where he's done the opposite, where he's gone from, being, an intrapreneur to an entrepreneur. So, so it really differs, and it can interchange. I can decide tomorrow that actually something that I've been cooking up within McKinsey, I want to go venture on my own and do it externally, as an example. So there isn't, a set meeting point, in anyone's career. It can literally, do 360s and 180s and all sorts. I think at the end of the day, I think the core differences between the two is what really matters. So as I said, both are leaders that innovate, whether within the company or outside of a company. But if I think of an entrepreneur, you probably have more freedom because you are, you're doing things in your own way at your own pace. But the trade-off is you probably are limited in terms of the resources that you are that you're able to work with, and limited by whether it's the funds you're able to raise, or limited by the savings you're able to garner, or the loans you're able to raise. Your resources are somewhat limited. Versus when you're an intrapreneur, you're not able to take as much sort of execution risk because you're kind of guarded within the bounds of the company, or you do have access to the company's resources. So there are trade-offs between the two.
Awesome, that's excellent. So next I'm going to move to Leon. The question I'm going to ask to three of you, but I'm going to begin with Leon actually, because I want to get perspective of how this applies across different firms, BCG, Bain, McKinsey. And so the first question is going to be, how does, be it entrepreneur or entrepreneurship, how are they being supported or how are they being utilized within your respective firms?
That's actually a very good question. And I think it really depends on the various companies. So from my experience at BCG, is there a differentiation between entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs? I'm not really sure, because these entrepreneurial skills that you have, they are being leveraged in so many ways. For example, on projects, when you work for clients, or within the company to better working conditions for everybody. So how are they being supported or utilized? At BCG, we have programs designed especially for people that during their project work come up with an idea. They can then submit that to a board that reviews that. And if you're lucky and you have a good pitch, there's a chance they will actually give you time and resources to pursue that idea as part of BCG. So I think that's a really good thing to do, so people don't have to quit and pursue their idea, but rather pursue it from the comfort of their current occupation. And I think that's something that BCG realized a lot of people have to deal with, having these ideas, having this drive to build something, and has now channeled into, hey, we know you have that, let us support you. And I think that's something that is very that a lot of consulting firms have to deal with. So I think my co-panelists will have similar stories to tell. But at BCG, like there's so many opportunities. Whether you switch to BCG Digital Ventures to help build up other businesses, or you want to build your own business and do it from like a BCG incubator first. So I think there's no general answer to that. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what Gerald and Ricky have to say.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because, I have had this conversation with a friend of mine who is looking to pursue a startup company, but he's also passionate about consulting. And he's kind of afraid, if I pursue consulting, will I have to give up this other dream of me pursuing and starting my own firm? So it's happy. It's great to hear that some of these bigger consulting firms also support entrepreneurial activities within the firm. So I would like to hear from others. But before then, just to remind our audience, for the first 1 hour, we are going to be kind of communicating with the panel. I'm going to be asking questions and they are going to be responding. And thereafter, the last 30 minutes of this show, we are going to start taking questions from you. But as far as this conversation is going, just keep on popping in your questions, whether you're watching from YouTube, from Facebook, from Twitter, pop them in at the platform where you're watching. I'll be able to see them here. And at the end, we'll be able to take those questions one after the other according to how they are coming. So I guess I could go back to Gerard to tell us what you think. How are these entrepreneur skills being supported at Bain, or how are they being utilized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's a similar story to what my other sort of fellow panelists has talked about with regards to if there are any ideas internally, the firm will support you in getting those out into the world. I guess you'd still kind of have that tie back to we've helped you within this particular idea, and you'd always still have them on your back. But I guess if you put in a good pitch, Bain is one of those firms where you're never put into a box in your approach at work. Everything is kind of like whatever you can bring to the table, whatever ideas that are beyond conventional, put them on the table. And if some of them are things that need further execution in the real world, they'll support you going out into the real world. I guess the only real addition I have, with that is, from my observations of it, it really depends on your role and where you are within your career. I know as a consultant, there are like expectations that you're fully committed to cases, where you're staffed on them. And it can be a little bit difficult, to try and foster a startup outside of that. However, there are opportunities that you can take, like leave of absences, which, you can request, and you can take the time off working from your, for your firm and focus on building your own thing, whatever that may be. But, ultimately it's a personal choice, right? For some people, they need that full focus on their particular ideas, whereas some people would find the time, doing their day-to-day job, but also fostering their startup. So, if you're passionate, you would ultimately find the time. And, Bain are extremely supportive of entrepreneurs. If it's not in the way of doing your job, and I, for one, have been, given plenty of opportunities at Bain to showcase my business internally. I've hosted pop-ups at Bain, and, our consultants and managers come and I get to measure them and play the role and so on. So it's quite good sometimes, to be able to bring that, that version of yourself to work and, see other parts that you can bring to the business, basically. But on the side of entrepreneurship, it's kind of a different story. I guess, as biased as this may sound, I don't think I have worked anywhere else that's greatly supportive of bringing your own ideas to the table, as I mentioned. We're confident in what we do, but, it doesn't mean we always have to stick to a script. I guess being the smaller firm in the trio of MBB firms, I believe we're much more nimble in our approaches, and we encourage our consultants to, assert themselves and, use their own initiatives and think of their own approaches towards problems, and sticking with, Bain's established methods of doing things.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think later on we're going to follow you up on the question about how you've been able to manage your own establishment and then still working for Bain within. And so, but before that, let's go to Ricky. Ricky, how does this play out at McKinsey?
Sure, no, absolutely. I really like the way Gerald framed it. I think maybe three things in true sort of consultant type speak. So I think first is how we solve problems for our clients. We really utilize those skill sets, whether you call it entrepreneur skills. We utilize those skill sets in how we solve problems for our clients. One of our firm values that's a true value for us is the obligation to dissent. And the way it plays out is, in a team room when we're problem solving and coming up with solutions for our clients, there are no hierarchies, right? So the partner can have a viewpoint, the business associate, the business analyst can have a viewpoint, the pre-BA can have a viewpoint, and all viewpoints are more. It's the beauty of the industry, across MBB. We hire people that are truly diverse in terms of their skill sets and their backgrounds and stuff. So you get very exciting views in a team room when it comes to problem solving, because people can attack things from very different angles. And so from an entrepreneurship skill set, that's kind of where an avenue where you're able to sort of showcase a different way of thinking, and to get to the best answer for the client. So that's one. I think secondly, one of the great things at McKinsey that we are able to do for our clients is support the sort of conceptual work that we do with clients with some of the infrastructure that we bring to the roles that we play. And by that, what I mean is sort of what we call the assets that we bring. So it's really kind of in terms of software, right? So we have a variety of different software that very interestingly have been developed by colleagues of mine. You're working on a client problem, you see an opportunity to actually develop a bit of software that improves our answer 10x. You're encouraged to go ahead and develop it. And interestingly enough, we actually use that, right? So you can actually almost offer your software as a service to a client team. that's taking something to a client. And that for me is entrepreneurship, like true entrepreneurship within McKinsey, because you're literally developing something that you're then selling, and it's being used, on client sites, and solve client problems. And then the last thing, and I won't sort of go into this third one too much because I think my co-panelists have given really cool stories about this, is how you can actually do stuff that's completely outside of the firm, outside of consulting, and are encouraged to do so, whether it's through the internal incubator type drives that are happening, or where you're able to come into work with your wares, as it were. This one I have to say, people have just tried every opportunity to just have free lunches with my cakes. So it's great. But these are some of the ways that the firm, and McKinsey is not sort of unique in this. I think all three of the MBBs definitely encourage entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship skills.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Nikki. So I guess the next thing, we've heard from our three different panelists about how entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, whichever way you call it, are being supported and how they are being utilized within their respective firm. So until now, we've been talking about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. So the next thing I want to start looking at is consulting versus entrepreneurship itself. I'm going to go for entrepreneurship first because most of the people who are probably going to be watching us, who are going to be engaging us today, are going to be people who probably are trying to found a company or already founded a company and then trying to see how to push that forward to a more successful firm, or those who are kind of looking to come into consulting. So wanted to see how does these two things relate and how can one use one to serve the other. So on that basis, my first question will actually be, how does being an entrepreneur, because somebody who thinks that he has an entrepreneurial skills will be wondering, how can I utilize this in consulting? So how does being an entrepreneur actually prepares one for a career in consulting? Leon, would you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So thinking about that for a second, I think there's a long list of skills that could make you a successful entrepreneur. And I think there's an equally long list that makes you a potentially good consultant. And it comes down to that I think the overlap between these lists of skills that make you good at what you're doing is very big between consulting and entrepreneurship. I think they have a very similar skill set. And I think it comes down to the key skills that you're working with, that they both share. And that could be something like taking ownership for what you're doing in an entrepreneurial environment. When you have your own company, ownership is crucial because nobody else is going to do that for you. So if you don't do that, nobody's going to do that. And it's similar in consulting, because when you're part of a project and you have that ownership, if you don't do that, that doesn't necessarily mean nobody's going to do that, but you are expected to fulfill the parts that you're given to the best of your ability, much like an entrepreneur. And continuing that list, I think there's multiple other skills that come into play, like taking action. I think consultants and entrepreneurs are very proactive people that like to go out there and do stuff. I think they both develop practical solutions that have a real world value that can translate into impact. I think both require strong teamwork skills, because ultimately both companies and consulting projects can only be successfully delivered as part of a good team. And both require strategic thinking. So you see, just me naming a few things, I think there's a very big overlap in between the skills required to excel at the two professions. And that's why I think moving from one to another, moving either from entrepreneurship to consulting or from consulting to entrepreneurship, is possible. And if you're good at one thing, that gives you a good good chance that you're also good at the other thing because of the overlap of skill sets.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think I completely agree with you. We can always see a kind of overlap between what these two people does, whether you're a consultant or you're somebody who is working as an entrepreneur. Later on, we're going to also start looking at how the reverse could also be the case, how you can utilize consulting skills to pursue an entrepreneurial venture. But before then, maybe I should go back to Ricky again. If you could chip into this, how does being an entrepreneur prepares one for a career in consulting? Maybe you can share with your own experience. How does that actually help? Yeah.
Sure. No, I'm happy to. I think Leon phrased it quite nicely in terms of, the correlation. And the one that really resonates with me is really about mindset and that ownership mindset. I think as an entrepreneur, you obviously are an owner. That you can't really. It's not really up for choice. It's yours, right? So you own it. And so having that ownership mindset means that when a problem arises, you have to solve it. When you need to go, take your business out and sell your business, you interact with clients and you work out how to meet clients where they're at, right? So, you very quickly, because of that ownership mindset, develop all of the skills that are needed to excel in your business. Those are all of the same things that you need to be a good consultant, right? You need to own the problem that you're trying to solve for your client. And so as a result of owning the problem you're trying to solve, you will find the experts, you will find, the market research, you will find whatever it is that you need to get that problem solved. Again, it's that ownership mindset. I think the only other thing I would add to what Leon said was this notion of, I would call it maybe bedside manner, because you understand the other person on the other side of the table. You've been there. You've been a client. You've been in the on the business end. You've been on the operations end. So you understand where it hurts for them. And so because of that, you're able to relate better and able to really communicate to them at the level that that they'll get.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I guess I could move on. The next question I'm going to ask now has something to do with how to prepare an entrepreneur for a recruitment process, to actually go through the recruitment process for someone who is probably an entrepreneur but looking to pursue a career in consulting. And so for that, I would move to Gerard. Maybe I could ask you first how this plays out at Bain. How does being an entrepreneur help one to secure a consulting job? How can you demonstrate that during a recruitment process? And what are recruiters actually looking for?
I would say in the recruitment process, I believe, it's true for all of the firms that, whenever they're trying to pick out candidates, we're actively looking for exceptional ones who have shown their prowess outside of just academia. What makes you stand out are those entrepreneurship skills, taking ownership, being extremely resourceful, being able to manage stakeholders on a day-to-day basis. I think, going back to one of my mentors always says, to be truly successful in your professional career, you need the 3 E's, right? You need experience, exposure, and education. Now, within any sort of a career line I've seen out there, I don't think any kind of sums it up well when it comes to consulting. You get that sort of 3-pronged approach when you're working in consulting, but also as an entrepreneur. And, if you can bring those skill sets to your recruitment process, being able to show that you are well educated in what is consulting, how do you think out of the box with your approaches? How do you, besides what everyone might be looking at and thinking is a easy solve, there's a lot of case testing that goes through That's part of your recruitment process. You have to showcase that you're able to think a little bit outside of what everybody else conventionally would approach. And one of those skills is what makes a candidate stand out, as well as what else are you doing just besides your academia? Are you just a student, or have you dug a little deeper to find out where else you can apply those skill sets, whether it's starting your own business, partnering up with I guess non-profits, or just things that are not always tied to I was doing a summer job just to get money. What else were you getting into in that time frame? And I think, just to answer a little bit of your question around that, I always tend to see it the other way around, where most, a career in consulting prepares you to be an entrepreneur, whereas the other way around, it's a little bit more trickier, right? Because then you're having to, come back to this bureaucracy of, decisions from the top down and so on and so forth. So I think, if you've got those skills already as an entrepreneur, coming into consulting can be a little bit tricky, but I think, depending on how much longer you spent as an entrepreneur, you'd understand there's a psychological element to this, where it's, knowing who your clients are, being able to, appease them in when you're selling cases to them, or when you're working with them on particular cases. So I think, there isn't a right or wrong approach, but it's just like, bringing those skill sets to the table. Consultancies would always appreciate entrepreneurship skills. And, as a consultant, it's always a good exit opportunity if you can take those skills and then build your own businesses. So, there isn't a right or wrong, answer in this approach.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I guess I could give Leon a chance to also comment on this.
Yeah, sure. So I think Gerald just touched on two really, really important points. First one being drive, what I would put under drive. So one thing that combines both fields, be it entrepreneurship and consulting, is the common notion of drive. So you want to change something. And the second thing Gerald touched on, which kind of counteracts that, is while you're completely free to do as an entrepreneur whatever you like, in consulting you're sometimes not. So there's a rule book somewhere, which is not written, but like you somehow feel you have to stick to the rules. And after all, when you're working for a client, you have a problem that you set out to solve, or you have an objective you're trying to achieve. So while an entrepreneur maybe goes around and channels his drive into coming up with creative solutions that might be totally away from what he usually set out to solve at the very beginning. In consulting, you have to make sure you're consistently on track towards solving that problem that you set out to do, because this is what the client wants you to do. And when you come in and you're expected to solve A, you can't just check back in 3 weeks later and say, hey, we didn't solve A, but we solved B instead. So here are the slides for that. So I think that's one difference, this surrounding this whole concept of freedom to do whatever you like. And how does this play out in the recruitment process? I think Gerald also had a very good answer for that, being exposure, education, and experience. I really like these 3 E's. I didn't hear about them before, because what you have to demonstrate is essentially that whatever you did before, you somehow know why you did that. You somehow can show that you created an impact and not just did it for fun. And that's going to help you in the recruitment process, because you can talk about problems that you solved before. You can talk about how you overcame complex situations and you had to act, and how you did it. You can talk about teamwork situations where you, as part of a team, were able to overcome a challenge together. And that is really what they're looking for in the recruiting process. These are the people that get admitted to the next round, because ultimately you need team players, you need people that are willing to take on challenges. And if you're able to showcase that with either entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial work, that's going to get you a long way in the recruitment process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I guess I could still follow up on this same question, but slightly I'm going to modify that for Ricky. And it's going to come in this way, actually. How can an entrepreneur demonstrate these skill sets that we're talking about during the recruitment process? So we've known that, okay, you need to have this, you need to be able to show that you can actually approach complex problems in a unique way to distinguish yourself from the other candidates and all of that. But just using your own personal experience, your entrepreneur journey, and your experience at McKinsey, how do you think an entrepreneur can actually demonstrate these skills during a recruitment process?
No, absolutely. I think my co-panelists have touched on this quite well, right? I think across the MBB, one of the things that we look for is your entrepreneurial drive. The drive that Leon sort of touched on, and the way it, I guess, is demonstrated in the interviews or the recruitment process is either through the questions that they ask you about your past experiences. So describe a time when you have X, right? A lot of those questions, when you're answering them and you're able to draw on experiences that you've had as an entrepreneur, really, really stand out because it goes beyond simply sort of laying out a time when you worked as part of your study group. You're actually talking about a time when you were driving something as an entrepreneur. So it plays out a lot in the interview process that way. I think also in the case on the case side of things, when you're being presented the case that you need to go through, the way that you think about solving the problem as an entrepreneur versus as a fresh out of uni student is very different. As a student, you come at a problem in a case very theoretically. You sort of think, oh, it's a profit problem, so revenue versus cost. An entrepreneur would think a lot more robust than that. So it definitely plays out in the recruitment process, tremendously. So I wouldn't sort of think, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, so maybe consulting isn't suited for me, or I can't quite crack the recruitment process. I think that you stand a really, really good chance as an entrepreneur to be able to thrive at the recruitment process. On the job, sorry, my son is trying to be stealth in the background. Please forgive him. On the job, again, just the way that problems are being solved, right? I talked about the diversity of people in a room, as part of a team trying to solve a problem. An entrepreneur on the job, thinks about a problem, almost from the client's lens or the client's perspective, which is really, really important. All too often, we, as consultants, are very narrow visioned on, best practice says X, your competitors are doing Y, and this is therefore what you should be doing. But someone who's been an entrepreneur, who's sort of sitting in that team room, oftentimes drops a gem that's, super important because they're thinking about it from the client's perspective. I think that, entrepreneurs can definitely demonstrate their skills, both in the recruitment process, but also on the job to, real good levels.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that amazing tips. I'm sure that is going to be useful to a whole lot of people. The reason why I kind of brought this particular question is that oftentimes I have a couple of friends around Cambridge. For instance, if you tell them, okay, we're having an entrepreneur event, do you want to come around? It's like, oh, no, I'm not interested in funding a job, in funding a startup. I probably just want to go into consulting and all of that, or do whatever X or Y. But sometimes I tell them, I think whatever your destination is, you still will be able to utilize whatever entrepreneurial skill set that you kind of get going forward. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that. So I'm going to move backwards a bit and pick up the consulting and then move forward and join that with startup that people already have and see how one, consulting skills can be applied to a business that a founder is already running. And then two, see the experience that you guys as consultants have when it comes to trying to support, I don't know, maybe you've been on a project that involves you supporting a startup or something like that, or even if it's a multinational, a big business, but maybe they're trying to create a niche, they're trying to create a new thing within the business, something they've never done before. It could be a subsidiary of a bigger conglomerate and all of that. So I want to ask questions that are going to start helping us think about how we can use consulting skills to actually support entrepreneurship and all of that. So the first question I have is going to be, how much of consulting that you do in your respective firm actually involve startups? So we could start from Jared. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I on mute?
Yeah, I just submitted it. Yes.
Cool. I would probably say maybe 20% of the work we do is in startups. I know, for the particular practice area that I work in, we don't work as much with startups, but I know at Bain there's quite a lot of drive for supporting startups or even not-for-profits where we're trying to, generate ways for them to be generating much more income or revenue. So I know there's a lot of initiatives like that at Bain, but because I work within transformation being most organizations that are already at the maturity stages, I don't get as much involvement in that, but I know Bain does quite a lot of work with startups.
Awesome. Leon?
Yeah, I wouldn't really be able to put a percentage on that, but I think it really depends on the area you're working in, because I know about people that spend most of their time working in let's say startup environments, maybe not startups, but innovation heavy environments that behave like a startup. So for example, if you're working within the group for BCG Digital Ventures, that would be maybe 100% of your time. Give me a second. It's getting a little loud here.
Yeah. No problem.
So when you're working for BCG Digital Ventures, that would probably be 100% of your time. And when you're working for BCG, I think it depends on the practice area you're working in. So I know one of my former partners used to do mostly startup projects, and last year I was, and that's very anecdotal evidence, I think most of the year I worked for startups, but that doesn't mean that every consultant at BCG works for startups half of the time. So I think it really comes down to the area. It comes down to luck, basically. What project did you get assigned to? It comes down to who are your contacts? It comes down to what part of the work stream of a project are you connected to? So it's really a lot of variables that influence that. And I think overall, working at any of the three major firms in consulting, you can always work with a startup and you can always avoid it. So it really comes down to personal choice and making it happen if you want to.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So I can move to Ricky to tell us what it is like at McKinsey.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with Leon. I also can't put a percentage on it, but maybe the only thing I would add, in addition to what both of Leon and Gerald have shared, is we also work with sort of private equity houses that sometimes have us needing to work on sort of due diligences on startups, right? So we are able to work with startups from that lens, if you like. But then the client is not the startup necessarily, but the potential investor in that startup. So I've been fortunate enough to have worked with a startup all of the 5 years that I've been at McKinsey. So to Leon's point about if you want to avoid it, that absolutely can happen. And to Gerald's point about where we work, in transformation, you oftentimes don't get as much exposure to companies who are still trying to grow. I think the only other thing I would add to that then is, we at McKinsey have a part of our sort of CSR, is working, I think, similar to what, Jared shared, working with, startups as well as non-profits. And so I'll give an example of one recent event we ran. This was actually out of the McKinsey Lagos office. We essentially ran a full day type workshop. We had shortlisted, I believe it was about 7 startups, and we spent a day with each of the startups. The entire office had divided themselves into teams, and if you sort of think of a case interview but in reverse, so the startup was the interviewer, sort of sharing their business problems with us, and then as a team, trying to crack that case and come up with clear to-dos, next steps, structuring problems for the startups to then go away and explore further. That's just one of many different initiatives that the firm encourages for folks to run with the startup communities and the nonprofit communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I guess I could actually move to a question that could potentially be useful for those who already founded a company or some other person who is trying to found one. And that is going to be that if there is something that a startup founder can actually learn from a consultant or from a consulting company, what would that be? And Jared, would you want to go first? I always mute you.
Me, right?
Poor Gerald.
So I think there's quite a lot of skill set that you can sort of attain from consultancy that works very well for you in the entrepreneurship world. I would say probably the first thing is just being extremely resourceful. And I would say, I'd relate this back to my own story of, I started Collarbone out of, some of my travels within, with some of the cases I was working on. I ended up being in India. And I remember doing this touristy thing, and in India, they essentially do this thing where they pay taxi drivers to drive tourists into a building. And, whatever you buy, they get a percentage of it. And I remember just being driven to this complex that had loads of fabrics in there. And I started relationships there, and that's how I started my startup. And I just think, without that experience or that exposure from my work within the consultancy, I would never, I would plan a trip to India, but I wouldn't be thinking like that, right? So there's an extreme amount of resourcefulness, but also, just taking out the time to really understand, challenges that are in front of you right now, whether it's, geographical challenges, whether it's, I guess me positioning my startup in a different country just so that we can get much more revenue from sales and things like that. I think, part and parcel skills that you would normally, experience as a consultant, and just being able to translate that into businesses where, you're having to do that by yourself and think on your own feet and try and figure out how to form relationships with people, all of that stuff. You might not necessarily be I guess if you're working within consultancy, sometimes you might not be involved in the selling aspect of things and the, I guess initial stage conversations with clients. But, you learn as you go along that a lot of this, once you're aware of how to deal with them and how to, I guess, manage stakeholders, a lot of those skills are incredibly useful for you when you become an entrepreneur. It's kind of part and parcel. I don't think there's any other type of career you can get into that would give you that level of exposure and that level of variety of work that you can get into. One day you're solving a problem in oil and gas, and the next day you're in retail or chemicals or anything. So, it's kind of, there's a whole myriad of skills that you can take from the consulting world to become an entrepreneur.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Leon, would you have anything to add to that? What do you think, if there's anything the founder can learn from a consultant?
Yeah, I think Gerald put it nicely. There's so much you can learn. So, as I said in the beginning, they share a big skill set. So, of course, there's always something to learn from either side. But I thought a little what I would like to know. So, I thought a little about how to prioritize it or how to organize it. And for me personally, to make it very short and on point, one of the most important insights was in how do larger corporations work. So being an entrepreneur, you have your small startup and you have all the others, like you're trying to ramp sales up, you're trying to get your financials in order, you're trying so many things at once. And being a consultant, you have the unique opportunity to get a high-level overview over a lot of large companies in a very short time. So you can see patterns emerge, and you begin to understand how large corporations work and how the people think inside of them. So and that's going to help you as an entrepreneur to collaborate essentially to collaborate with these large organizations, because they are naturally not as entrepreneurial as you are. So you're not really speaking the same language. So you need to learn how to translate your entrepreneurial language or offering into something that they would understand, that they would find useful. And I think that requires an understanding of large corporations and how they work and how they think. And that's a skill that every young consultant gains very quickly, I think.
Awesome. So last but not least, Ricky, you want to share?
Sure. No, happy to. I couldn't agree more with what my co-hosts have already said. Maybe only two things I would add. One is being a consultant, you learn very quickly to be comfortable, in ambiguity. There's exactly what sort of Jared said. Today you're in oil and gas, tomorrow you're in retail, next tomorrow it's banking. A lot of things get thrown at you, and you learn very quickly to get comfortable in that. It's similar in being a startup. You are pretty much going to be firefighting from day one till day X, because you're always going to be chasing the next thing. And so that comfort as a sort of skill, it's a soft one, but it's still a very important skill that you learn from being a consultant is very helpful. It's helpful, and a nice sort of segue into my second point. It's helpful to allow you a stillness to be able to sort of structure problems, because when you're firefighting, it's very hard to be able to tell what weeds from the trees. I don't know how the saying goes, but something along just being able to sort of be 3,000 feet deep in the weeds and what you're doing, but also be able to sort of come up and look at the bigger picture, and sort of structure. Okay, what's important, what's urgent, what do I need to chase, what do I need to sort of do now versus delegate versus do later. I think being a consultant allows you that to practice those sort of muscles that are super critical for a startup founder.
Awesome, thank you so much. Just to remind you again to continue sending in your questions. In a couple of minutes, we are going to start looking at questions from the audience. And so just continuing, I want to move to, again, still on entrepreneurship and consulting. The next question I want to ask is around how the skills that you get as an entrepreneur, how does that help to make you a good consultant? And I don't know, Miran, you want to take on that first?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that, because how fast does my bike need to be to bring me to where I want to go? Fast enough. So I think there's no definite answer to that question. How entrepreneurial do I need to be a good consultant? Entrepreneurial enough. would be my answer. And I think it comes down really to the skills we mentioned in the very beginning. It comes down to the mindset, and since they share a large percentage of these two dimensions and the elements within that. I think even if you go to the extreme and you're a very bad entrepreneur, that doesn't necessarily mean you will be a bad consultant, and vice versa. So I think that question really comes down to the individual. But after all, I think if you succeed or if you bring a lot of these qualities, and if you learn a lot, and if you just open your eyes while doing what you're doing, and you learn from others, and you take in your environment, and you as an entrepreneur, you fail fast, you learn your lessons, I think that's gonna make you more experienced than your peers, and thus give you a head start when becoming a consultant. And I think that's the least generic answer that I could possibly give.
Okay, thank you so much. I think still on this question, but I want to kind of put some context around it. I have a PhD student who told me that he got employment with McKinsey, really. And then there was something she said, she did mention. She said, PhD is somehow different from what you do as a consultant. In the lab, you can afford to try a whole lot of things and be confident that even if it fails, nothing, you've just discovered one way it wouldn't work. But in consulting, while you are trying to be creative, you wouldn't want to put the business of your clients in line, in jeopardy. You want to make sure that the suggestion you are giving is really what it is. So you don't have that leeway to try as many options as possible as you would try in the lab with someone else's business. So on that note, I want to ask again, how entrepreneurial do I need to be as a consultant? So Gerald, you want to go next? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that was a very, very interesting way of putting things. I guess, being an entrepreneur is not easy. I would never, I can't begin to tell you how difficult it can be sometimes. And, as much as you're working within a firm where you're, expected to be results driven and everything needs to be perfect, sometimes there's still an opportunity for you to learn much more on the job than as an entrepreneur, right? Because it's now, you're playing with your money, your investment, or other people's money, or, there is much more room. I guess in a way, there's room for failure, but there's nothing to catch you underneath, right? Whereas in consultancies, you're working within a team, and sometimes you're able to pull from people's different skills, without having to put your whole life on the line for it. And, I still think it's a better way of doing things, getting those skills, that you need within consultancy, because, it's not just you as a person, it's the team's effort, right? So whatever I'm not good at, and it's one of the things that's actively encouraged within the MBB firms, right, where you don't leave a next man, I guess, you don't let a next man fail. And it's one of the things that are imbued in our culture at Bain. And while you're not letting the next man fail, you're learning from whatever experiences that's being put in your way. And, just having that confines to make those mistakes, or not necessarily explore this side of things and just contributing what you're able to contribute, it gives you that kind of like view, that top level view of what can I improve on in this case that I'm working on, and how can I apply that to the next case. And you can learn and learn as you go along. Whereas, once you're an entrepreneur and you fail at this stuff, it can be very tricky sometimes to try and find your feet again. And obviously you have all those other societal expectations and family and all of that other stuff that plays a role behind the scenes, that you wouldn't otherwise have if you were great and high flying in your career. So I guess to answer your question about how entrepreneurial you need to be, I think, I go with Leon's approach here. There's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just,
Okay.
it's just how comfortable you are in failure, really. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to give Ricky an opportunity to also contribute to this, but I'm going to slightly take that question to say, what do you see as an obstacle that might prevent an entrepreneur from succeeding as a consultant? Again, I think it's the same thing as saying how entrepreneurial could one be, but I want to just rephrase that question to kind of bring in some of that context there.
David, you also have to let her comment on the previous question because she was shaking her head so violently. You have to give her the chance.
Yes, no, of course. Thanks for that, Leon. It was the context that you set, and I'm sorry, I have to disagree with the comment or the notion that you are not allowed to have a wrong answer. I mean, I think all of the MBB operate this way. We're very hypothesis driven. So it's always answer first, and then you prove or disprove that hypothesis. So the notion of being hypothesis driven in itself, sorry, there's an echo. I don't know if it's just on my end. But the notion of being hypothesis driven in itself means that you have to come up with an answer, and you're not, future fortunes, soothsayer. You will get it wrong, right? Yes, as Jared says, you've got the backing of the experts and the team and all of the folks who have worked in those fields before and can sort of nudge you or point you in the right direction. But oftentimes, by virtue of being hypothesis driven, you will probably get it wrong. But the whole point of starting there is that you can very quickly, disprove, a wrong hypothesis and then get to the right answer. So yeah, I violently disagree that you cannot get it wrong as a consultant, or you don't have the leeway or the bandwidth. Certainly at McKinsey, you are allowed to get it wrong as long as you get it wrong quickly, so that we can course correct you. That said, fully agree with, again, Leon, Jared on this. How entrepreneurial. How long is a piece of string? And it really boils down to, what do we mean by entrepreneurial, right? Because you can be entrepreneurial in the way you work, you can be entrepreneurial in how you approach problems, you can be entrepreneurial in how you, how you interact with clients, right? So, entrepreneurial in itself is kind of like a very broad, phrase or term rather. And so, how entrepreneurial you can be to be a good consultant is really to be answered depending on which of the entrepreneurial selves you're describing, right? Whether it's way of working or problem solving, etc. The obstacles, on the other point, sort of as you've nicely rephrased the question, that can prevent an entrepreneur from succeeding, I would say it's down to self, right? So what I mean by self is, as an entrepreneur, you're kind of working without confines. You're pretty as free as I guess your investors will let you be, right? So you've got a very, very broad degree of freedom, and so you probably are comfortable as an entrepreneur. Depending on how long you've been an entrepreneur, you probably become very comfortable and set in a way of working that might not quite jive with being a consultant. And what I mean by that is, consultants can be very 80-20, and I think I speak for all MBB, right? Which means that, I think Leon said, fail fast, right? You get a wrong hypothesis, you quickly disprove it, and you move on to the correct one. An entrepreneur might not quite be that way inclined. You might sort of have an idea in your mind, and I say this because, this was me. You have an idea in your mind, and you see it through, and you see it through, and you see it through, and even when, like, all the writings are on the wall that it's not the right thing to do, you're like, because you're invested in it, and that can be, you can get accustomed to that as a sort of way of working as self, and that can then be detrimental to as a consultant, because it's very clear that this hypothesis that you came up with is wrong. Drop it, move to the next one. But you're like, no, and you want to keep going at it. And that doesn't quite jive with being a consultant. So I would say maybe the obstacle is more of a self obstacle than it is, the skill of being an entrepreneur. And so that's probably the only thing that I can think of as a potential obstacle.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I guess the next question I want to ask now, I'm going to give three of you the opportunity to say something on it. And it's going to be, I want you to share your experience as an entrepreneur and as well as a consultant. So when I mean experience, I mean, I want you to, if you could spend a couple of minutes to tell us about your journey with your respective startups, whether they are still ongoing, whether you decided to let them go because you became too focused with consulting and all of that. I wanted to share this in a way that will help our audience or anyone who is watching this to see how you started and how that helped you in your consulting, maybe in your recruitment process or after you've landed a job in consulting firm, and how that whatever skill set you've gotten from being an entrepreneur has kept you going. I don't know who wanna go first. The first question I'm throwing open.
I'm happy to go.
How many hours?
And then we all jump at once. No, go on, Leon.
Now, Rick, you go first. I was just asking David how many days he has planned for this, but yes.
Exactly. Well, hopefully mine will be short. So I started Cupcakery. God, I can't remember how many years ago it was now. But it really came out of I guess two things. One, my creative side. At the time, after undergrad, I essentially qualified as a chartered accountant with KPMG right after my undergrad. And the one thing you can't be as an auditor, not as a consultant, is creative. So as an accountant, you cannot be creative. As a consultant, by all means, please be creative. But as an accountant, that was the one thing I couldn't be. And so I guess my creative streak needed, it had an itch. And so I absolutely love baking, love creating, weird and wacky things through, confectionery, sugar, chocolate, whatever. And so I started the business really from a place of from a hobby, from a place of joy that I had. And very quickly, as I grew the business and started hiring staff and having multiple locations, found myself doing more of the admin-y things and not enough of the thing that I really loved to do, which was, be in the sugar, be in the creative process. And so I kind of started to lose my my joy for it, because I would go into the kitchen and my staff would literally just, we don't need you. We've got this. And so I would be relegated to paperwork and all of the really boring stuff. And so I very quickly decided that I would rather keep it as a hobby as opposed to, a business. And instead, save my, I guess, business-minded self for something that, would be, would not be, I guess, a hobby in that sense. So I made a decision that I was going to go to business school, and so very quickly sold the business. It's still up and running today. It was bought by an Italian patisserie chain, and is now basically operating as their sort of sweet confectionery arm of the patisserie chain in Bedfordshire. So that's my story.
Awesome. I hope I will be able to travel. I would like to try that cup of cake. I've heard a lot about that. Yeah. So
if you ask nicely, I might bake a cake.
For sure, I'm gonna ask nicely, of course. So, Leon, I don't know. You were asking me how many days, Leon. I don't know if you plan to use the entire day, but anyway, we can go for you.
Now let me cut it short. So what was the initial idea of my company? Essentially, I somehow got in touch with rental cars, and this is when I discovered that there's when you rent a rental car and you have a one-way drive only, that car has gone from its home base to another base. So over the course of time, this distribution of rental cars becomes uneven by just operating the business, because people drive from one point to another. Maybe they close an airport here, so you have a surplus of cars there. So naturally, there is a natural need for cars to be relocated and redistributed. So this is when I discovered there's a huge market behind rental car services that is just focused on relocating and redistributing cars. And the way that works is that the rental car companies submit an order to a service company that then get a driver to the car. He gets in, he drives the car to the location that it's got to be, and then he gets up, he gets on the train, and he drives back. And I thought, holy cow, that is a very inefficient process. At the same time, there's so many students out there, and there's so many people looking for a ride, and there's so many people looking for cheap mobility. Why don't you just combine these two large markets, the demand for drivers and the demand for cars, essentially, or the demand for low-cost mobility? So this is what we did. This is what we set out to do. We wanted to hook onto the big databases of the rental car companies and offer these cars that needed to be relocated for everybody to drive. And we got really far with that, actually. So we spoke to the people in charge. One thing our solution required, though, was a database to hook onto, and that was the point in time when I realized that the rental car business, as it's being run today, is so they're not Google. Let's put it like that. They're not Google. So they do a lot of stuff with telephones. They do a lot of stuff with fax. Like they use email if they're very digital. So most of the time they actually use analog channels, which it is really hard to hook onto with a digital business model. And I'm sure Gerald and Ricky can relate. If you try to single-handedly push digital transformation for a whole industry, that's going to take you longer than just 3 months. So while we had a great team, we actually did have a great team, and we had a lot of supporters, and we had really like ideal conditions to start. The point that made us rethink our priorities and made us reorientate ourselves was when we realized that there's not a lot of companies out there, not a lot of large companies renting cars out there. So let's say there's maybe 5 large enough companies on the market, and also they do not they rent out cars. They are not they don't sell fleet management solutions with the greatest digital APIs that you can imagine. This is not their business, and so there was a natural disconnect that meant we would have to look for something else to do. So that was that. But I learned a lot of lessons along the way, and I was actually very fortunate during my last year when I was still at BCG. Or I am still at BCG, when I was actively on a project with BCG last year, a lot of these qualities came back to me when we tried to redesign the startup ecosystem, because I could bring out all these pain points from being an entrepreneur a few years earlier in actually setting up a company, which is a process much more complex in Germany than it is in the UK, in my perception. So I could bring out all of these pain points in actually founding a startup and dealing with everyday administrational hurdles, for example, and we could then collect that and into a proposal or into a study and actually make a difference by working together with the German government. And to answer your question, how did my entrepreneurial journey benefit my consulting career? This is probably one of those points where I had a lot of experience from an entrepreneurial journey that then enabled me to have a more comprehensive picture of the world when I was in consulting, and enabled me to brainstorm better or better solutions that revolved around a really existing problem, because I knew how the world was out there. And I think that's probably the summary I would leave it with. I think you muted yourself, David.
Yeah, sorry. Awesome. I completely agree with the view that you shared. I was asked, Nick, one of my mentor, how would you define an entrepreneur? He says, well, I will simply tell you that an entrepreneur is someone who's got the stomach to fail. If you don't have the stomach to take that failure and learn from it, then you are not worthy of becoming an entrepreneur. So quickly, I will just move to Gerard to share his own journey and how that has propelled or helped him in the consulting industry. You're on mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I guess like my story kind of starts way back. I'm kind of one of those students when I was quite young. I grew way too taller than my peers, and by the time I was 11 years old, I was already 6 foot tall, and everyone was like, this guy, where is he going with this? And I remember just like, just finding it extremely difficult to go into a store and find anything in my size, everything from, I wear a size 15 UK shoes, my arms are extremely long, just nothing was ever easy to find in my size. And, it was a recurring problem as I kept growing. And I remember, when I was working at BCG, a lot of the cases, I was traveling about 78% of the time. And I remember just sat in my hotel one day and just thinking to myself, I've finished working on the case. It's now evening. I have time to myself. What else can I do here, right? And I just started exploring manufacturers out there. Like every country I would land in, I would spend my weekends there, or maybe ask for 2 more days and try and solve some manufacturers. And, I ended up in India. I've kind of told you guys that story. Formed a bunch of relationships there and decided, oh, maybe let's turn this into a business. Let's make it a lot more efficient, I guess. But just to go back a little bit, part of that challenge of finding my size meant I'm extremely, passionate about fashion. I had to wear a lot of custom clothing during all of these difficulties and not being able to find anything. And it just dawned on me how, how restricted that particular business is. You go into a tailor, you have an appointment, you sit there with them, you spend time combing through fabrics. They take 6 to 8 weeks to deliver you a product. And for me, I was too impatient for 6 to 8 weeks. And I decided, whatever business I do, I'm going to speed up that process and make it far much more, accessible to the common man. It was either solve that problem or forever be tied to Marks and Spencer's 2-inch longer range, which, as anyone who has my challenges would know, every year, because of these retail brands move with trends, the less tall people they are, the less they manufacture for us. So it just kept getting worse and worse. And I just decided I was going to turn a business. I was going to make this a business. So I was going to find as much manufacturers who would meet the same standard as your London, Savile, and I decided to start the business. And I think, the first challenges for me was how to change the way in which I myself, going from a customer to then becoming the seller of shirts and having to change my whole mindset around how people think around this particular subject. And, luckily for me, my career has always been, kind of like aligned with information technology. So I was trying to essentially mix the two and provide a solution, to make things a lot more easier for tailors. You can utilize, the abundant network of tailors and dry cleaners on every street in England. And, my goal at the sort of conception of this idea was to have these bunch of dry cleaners, have a platform where they can, type their postcode, visit their local dry cleaners, get measured, and then the shirts, they can consult with the dry cleaners on fabrics, and then the shirt gets made and delivered to them directly. At the time I set out forming relationships, I got a relationship with WeWork. They allowed me to host, a set of as many pop-ups as I wanted to across different locations in the UK. We had this rolling series of shirts in the city pop-up, would go to these buildings and then set up shop, and I'd be there measuring people and so on and so forth. And it was fun getting that experience of the difficulties and just understanding how ridiculous most of these measurement conventions are made. If you're a guy right now and you walk into a store, your shirt measurements are given to you based on your neck size. So you buy a 17-inch neck, and the rest of it is all based on the brand's decision on how they want to, elongate their arms or not. And it's quite ridiculous how we've been able to go, the last sort of 50, 60 years with that same approach. So, my goal is not just to, provide bespoke shirts, but also just change the mindset around that, and, reducing as much waste within the fashion industry and having a solution that solves that problem. But also, right now we're in the process where we've just acquired a competitor, and what they have is this brilliant algorithm that comes up with, accurate measurements. So you answer a few questions, it comes up with accurate measurements. And that way you don't have to go in to see anyone. You can use the platform, design your shirts, and then place orders, and it gets made and delivered to you. And my end goal of all of this is to become a competitor for the likes of Shopify, who do a conventional e-commerce model, with people like me within the business, where everything you have to pick as you design. There isn't really platforms out there that cater to us. If I wanted to start a tie business, I want to be able to get people to pick their fabrics, pick the length of it, all of the different dimensions. And my goal is really to fill that space as a business, really, and supply my solution as a software as a service. Is the end goal. So I guess, how did it benefit my career? To give you a kind of a short history on this, a lot of the consulting firms just really started focusing on technology, as part of their offering whenever they're delivering strategy work. And, for me, being opportuned in being in information technology allowed me to, come into strategy consultancy and start to apply those skills, making them think of ways in which IT can be useful to them in how they deliver casework. Conventionally, what used to happen was the MBB firms would deliver strategy, and then execution would be left for the clients to do. But now, there's a lot more emphasis on having IT solutions that are continuously, giving those deliveries, and not just, we're in the door and we're out the door. So, a lot of the skills I learned within my startup has, I'm actively applying in my day role at Bain, and just finding ways in which technology can digitize all of Bain's IP and provide solutions that help us during transformation cases and all of the parts of subject areas that Bain focuses on. So.
Awesome, thank you so much. I would have loved to, I still have a couple of questions to ask, but we're already running out of time. I'm going to pick just one question from the audience. I really like this one, it's interesting. Anyone can actually go for this. And that question is coming from Ricardo Prali, and he says, how do you recommend transitioning from building solutions as a consultant to offering those solutions as products? I don't know. Leon, that wasn't on purpose. I just wanted to bring you out. I didn't want to hide my panelists. However, if you feel like you can take on that question.
I'll give it a try. Yeah. I think that depends on the solution as well. If it's a large let's say it's a larger project for a digital tool that you as a consultant plan to or that as a part of a team you develop for the client. I think then the company you're working for will have an interest in commercializing that nonetheless. So there's not a lot you need to do. But if you're working on something yourself, so let's say you develop a small tool that helps you in similar situations, like trying to think of something. I think ThinkCell, if you guys know ThinkCell, that started had a similar start. I think it was a few consulting guys that actually coded something that would help you in designing charts in PowerPoint, and it ended up being really, really useful. They ended up founding a company. They ended up selling the software to other companies, and this is something that you can do as well, but it's only, I think it's rather possible with small scale solutions or with solutions that you developed yourself. If it's something that you developed as part of a large team, I think it's going to be really difficult to do that by yourself. I think you're on mute.
I'm happy to let any other person contribute to this. Otherwise, because we're already out of time, I can give you a chance to Ricky. Okay, Ricky want to contribute, right?
No, I fully agree with what Leon said. It really depends on the solution itself. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna give each one of you, Ricky, since you're already there, fine, some opportunity, a few seconds. What advice, just wrap it up, what advice would you have for entrepreneurs out there who might wish to pursue a career in consulting?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think hopefully these 90 minutes that we spent with you have convinced you that there definitely is a home or a space for you as entrepreneurs in consulting. So if it's something that you're considering, by all means, please go for it.
Awesome. Leon?
Yeah, essentially just that. It's from my point of view, it's two things. First of all, if you're thinking about pursuing a career in consulting, find as much people or as many people that you can to talk to, and from various companies. So just because it's us three here now, don't limit yourself to McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. Go out there and talk to a lot of people and multiple people from the same company, because everybody will have their own version of what happened to them, and it's really diverse. No story is alike at any of these companies, so you want to make sure you diversify your input to be able to find patterns or to determine what company you would be happy at. And the second advice that I would have is really to just give it a try. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, you are used to just giving it a try. And that's exactly what you should do with consulting as well. Get yourself an interview at every company that you think is interesting and get to know them firsthand, because that will help you to determine where the best personal fit is. And that is what it ultimately comes down to when making your decision, from my point of view.
Awesome. So, Gerard, your final remark is that?
To what Leon and Ricky have mentioned, first of all, try and get as much info as you can about the particular firm you're interested in. Cast your net out there and make sure that you've explored every avenue that's available to you, whether it's speaking to individuals. Myself, after this interview, I'm readily available on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out anytime. But also, as Leon mentioned, make sure that you are settling for a firm which is firmly aligned with your aspirations for the future, whether it's the type of casework that they do. There's such a broad array of stuff within consulting, but also you need to find ones where your culture aligns and where you're coming from, really. And I guess as an entrepreneur out there, my colleagues always say, whenever you're working in consulting, you're working for the biggest travel agency in the world. If you want exposure, come into consulting, and it tremendously pays off anywhere in the world. You're able to get these different perspectives, and I don't think there's anywhere else you would get as much of those 3 E's that I mentioned. So yeah, feel free to reach out anytime and we can give you much more insight.
Awesome, thank you so much. I guess this is where we draw the curtain for today. But before that, I want to say thank you to our amazing panelists and for everyone who has joined us today. This is actually supposed to be the last event. It's just that we had to postpone it for the Lent term. And if you've been following us, we've run series of activities for this term as we prepare for the amazing and the maiden edition of the Watson Enterprise competition. I think 30th April, if you've not seen this, is flying everywhere around. We are going to be having the finalists coming to pitch to us. We are going to circulate the invitation for that. It's not like really entirely open to everyone, but we should be able to register as many investors, as many venture capitalists as possible to partake in the finalist program. So look forward to that. And yeah, so to that end, I would like to say amazing thanks to our panelists once again, and to you guys for joining us. So just keep an eye, follow us across our social media platform, like us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like our page on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and all of that, and just be connected, because by Easter time we have amazing stuffs to bring to you, and I hope those things will be something that we'll be looking forward to. So thank you guys, and see you next time.